Bonjour, bonjour, and welcome. I'm delighted to be here this evening with my very esteemed colleagues to be reviewing and discussing all the glory that is mitochondria and how that can impact our health, especially by way of chronic disease. And I'm especially in particular excited to be talking about what exactly chronic disease is, really liberating it from this idea that it needs to be a very specific diagnosis and how it conflates with aging. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Bryce Wild and Justin Harris to the conversation. And I wonder if we start off with, well, yes, remuneration. I wonder if we start off with Justin. So for everyone's awareness, Justin has actually hosted a very infamous now webinar on mitochondria with our Dr. Laura Varden. And I wonder, Justin, we're going to post a link to that so that people, if they want to jump back to that and kind of, hear a bit more of a detailed explanation, they can. But I wonder if you can ready our audience with the things that you and Dr. Laura discussed during your time there.
Yeah, absolutely. So hi again, everybody. My name is Justin, and you're right. That webinar, its infamy is only surpassed by Bryce's handsomeness. So that shows you how epic it was. And we went really deep on just the mitochondria themselves in that webinar. So I'll kind of recap it a little bit here, and perhaps B can post the link to that one in the webinar so that you can go back and listen to it if you want a really nice deep dive. So mitochondria, they are so relevant for healthy aging. They're so relevant for just the quality of life, how you feel, how your brain works, how your muscles work, how we perform. And a lot of people still have this idea that they're just there to create ATP energy, which is absolutely part of what they do. However, there's a lot broader kind of role that they play in human health. Interestingly, they're actually ancient bacteria that kind of morphed with human physiology a very long time ago. And they act as these epigenetic sensors, right? So they kind of sense different stimulus and input from the environment. And then they use that information, remembering that light is information, right? All of these inputs are actually information. The mitochondria use that now to go ahead and create energy, or maybe they'll create inflammation. Maybe they'll replicate. They can do a number of different things, and they play a really big role in how the human body functions in the cell. Each cell has a different density of mitochondria depending on the energy requirements for that cell, right? So every cell has a metabolism and a need to go ahead and create energy. So like a white blood cell might only have 15 to 20. A brain cell, like a neuron, might have tens of thousands, right? So it varies a lot cell by cell because different cells have different requirements. So, the mitochondria in today's discussion, we're going to relate it to chronic disease. The way I look at that is that the mitochondria kind of represent this reserve of vitality that we have in the body that can be called upon when we need it to fight off infections and cancers, all these various things. So when we look at it like that, we are talking about the actual battery for the human body. And it takes energy to fight disease. It takes energy to think and to blink and to do all these things. So when we lack that chemical energy, you can see the trickle down effect and how that's going to impact your ability to fight any number of these chronic diseases. A man who knows an awful lot about chronic diseases is my esteemed colleague, Bryce. Why don't you go ahead and say hi?
Hey, guys. Really great to be with you this evening. Wonderful prelude. And I'm excited to say that was one of my favorite webinars that I think I've ever seen be delivered at the DNA company, at least definitely within the top 3. So anyone who hasn't watched already, Dr. Laura Varden and Justin, please go and do so. I think I'd also like to add to this sort of concept of what they do and what they are, by suggesting that before we sort of get into the whole chronic disease issue, what ways in which we can, at least summary ways in which we can describe how to improve them. Because when they're dysfunctional, that's the whole topic of this evening, of course, disease ensues. And what we're not talking about, for everyone out there, is to make sure we delineate this. We're not talking about cytogenetics. We're not talking about mitochondrial disease. We're not talking necessarily about genetic diseases related to mitochondrial disease, but mitochondrial dysfunction. And off air, I think the three of us agreed that you could almost lead sort of any road, as it were, to mitochondrial dysfunction, to or backwards to a disease, or even forward. So I would just suggest that, before we get into this sort of disease, or sorry, I just correct myself there, dysfunction related conditions that they're, and I'm going to sort of maybe cart before the horse, but it'll make sense. The three ways that we want to consider improving mitochondria. And I'm going to go about it a little backwards for a bit of like a reverse engineer concept here. So number one, and as you've already alluded to, Justin, mitochondrial biogenesis, which just simply means this concept that we are able to create new mitochondria within our cells. And it's in every single cell of your body, as you already said, but higher concentration in the brain, the heart, with the exception, of course, of red blood cells. White blood cells have that percentage you're describing, but can be stimulated by exercise, caloric restriction. We'll get into all these different things, certain supplements, biogenesis. We can multiply them. Second, improving their efficiency. So aside from multiplying them, this involves optimizing how mitochondria produce ATP and how they signal and how they help us, divide certain cells, et cetera. And then mitophagy, which is the process of clearing out damaged, dysfunctional mitochondria. So the reason I thought we would start there is to reverse engineer this. Is when that system of that trifecta breaks down, then we are talking about chronic disease. And we should probably look at the poll, but we're talking about neurodegenerative diseases. We're talking about cardiovascular diseases. We're talking about metabolic disorders. Of course, type 2 diabetes, which is correlated directly with obesity back and forth, and cardiovascular disease. And even the big C, right? Cancer. So my clinical experience and aptitudes led me to believe that if I can't differentially diagnose, or DDX, if you will, or have a clear state of what I'm trying to deal with here, my fallback is frankly mitochondrial dysfunction. That's where my clinical practice has gone, and some of the testing and some of the interventions technologically, as well as ingredient interventions to enhance this. When I see that that's at least improving quality of life. So this extends itself to the plethora of FMS, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, even autism spectrum disorder, right? And all the age-relating diseases that go beyond Parkinson's, as we mentioned in the poll, and Alzheimer's disease. This is kidney, liver, hearing loss, age-related macular degeneration. The list is so long. So maybe we'll get into the poll. What do you guys think?
Yeah.
Dr. Kosterman, you want to?
I love that. I think if the powers that be want to pull that poll up, thanks. Yeah, because we want to make sure we're talking to the audience here. So of those surveyed, oh goodness, there is a strong split between chronic fatigue and brain fog, of which I appreciate. There's a lot of overlap, but a lot of people struggling with brain fog in general, chronic fatigue, so feeling tired. And separate to that, we're also hearing some vision and hearing loss, some Lyme disease. And I wonder, those that stated other, if you could toss those into the chat, because we want to make sure today that we're talking to you, that we're able to cover.
Seen some of them come up.
What have you seen come up?
I'm seeing things like idiopathic bone marrow disease, which is a little bit complex. I'm seeing mycotoxin poisoning, recovering from long COVID. Thank you. This is a varying degree of mitochondrial dysfunction at its best. So
absolutely.
Get into it.
Yeah. Okay. And so the next question we had, and this was just a feeler within the audience, of what do we know and assume to be associated to? So Bryce just kind of went over the plethora there of what mitochondria can be impacting. Most people clocked the cognitive decline, which is wonderful, and the Parkinson's and the ALS and the diabetes and cancer. But I think the most popular, at least the most aware, is really that cognitive decline, which echoes that, brain fog that people spoke of. And the last question that we have here is, and I think this one's a fun one. What is our audience doing to support their mitochondria, right? And so a lot of people, almost 85% of our audience, are taking supplements. And then the balance is kind of a split between the top ones, Bryce, that you've already mentioned. I think your and Justin and Dr. Laura's education has reached far: exercise, fasting, as well as sleep. And then there's a very honest 3% that have said nothing. I
Well,
value
they're
your
about to change that, aren't they?
exactly.
And I wish that, I wish that we, could see, I mean, listen, people are being honest and we really appreciate that honesty and transparency. But my desire is for, some of these things to, be in different order. I think what we are going to end up talking about today at some great length is how
Yeah.
exercise, fasting, and improving sleep hygiene need to be at the top in that order, and supplements right down at the bottom. I mean, supplements can help,
Yeah.
but they are often too quick. People want the quick solution, and they help, but they shouldn't be the first go-to.
Yeah.
There's a lot more power. So if we could add exercise and those things that induce autophagy, like fasting, mitophagy, we would probably, cure 80% of what ails the individual with mitochondrial dysfunction. But there's that caveat, and I'm not ignoring it. There's a catch-22. Often, as Justin even alluded at the beginning, they don't have the energy production to actually start exercising. So we get it. It can often be a conundrum.
Yeah. And to an extent, that's almost maybe not a diagnostic factor, but it's something I always check into, right? What is your capacity to exercise? How fatigued, how quickly into exercise are you fatigued? Because that can sometimes lend at least more of a qualitative awareness of where the person is at, as well as that recovery pathway, right? We want to make sure bodies are always moving. Even the ill body is not designed to be lying flat on the bed all day.
Absolutely. Well, to that end, scientists maybe only 15 years ago were focused on this idea of how to improve strength, and how to improve energy by, anything they could figure out to increase muscle size. Justin knows this all too well, this research. Myosin blockers of, muscle breakdown. And that was the big next drug. But then they quickly realized and came to, understand that just increasing the size of an organ like muscle tissue, which is now revered as the tissue of longevity, itself does not make it stronger. Being bigger does not make it stronger. The idea that there being more of a concentration of mitochondria, strong men, these guys that are just sort of average size but can lift 3 or 4 times the size of the bodybuilders, that's mitochondria at its best in sort of a phenotype.
Yeah.
Justin, you're like loaded. I know I just locked and loaded you there. Go.
Yeah. So it's actually funny when you look at strongman on the highest of levels. Gosh, they do not have the greatest of physiques, actually, most of them. But you're right; they've found a way through their training to actually recruit like the maximum amount of muscle fibers, and that has that trickle down effect to increasing mitochondrial density, because the density causes the power. Right? Power comes from that. So the difference in the world of aesthetics being bodybuilding and the world of power generation, that's where you're going to find that mitochondrial difference. I'm reminded of, we talk about lifestyle and we talk about supplements. I really think that all of these things are complementary. You're right. We need to start where the basics are. What I always say to my clients is kind of an overarching piece of advice, is that we have to embrace wholeheartedly that which serves us, and we have to wholeheartedly drop that which does not. Right. So we start with the diet, we start with the sleep, the weight training. HIIT training is another great, method to improve mitochondrial density. And then we add the other stuff. We add the urolithin A and the carbon 60 and the red lights, and on and on we can go with biohacking gadgetry. But it starts with a baseline, and then we kind of add to it as we go.
Well, and if I could add to that just for a quick sec, and then over to you, Dr. Klosterman, because this is a great place to start. Aging, which is ultimately, there's a lot of definitions to aging. Mitochondrial dysfunction is one of those, along with, oxidative stress, telomere attrition, et cetera. There's a bunch of different theories, but one that's garnering more and more of sort of a validity in the science community is mitochondrial dysfunction. But the other shared commonality, phenotypically with aging, is sarcopenia, muscle loss, even more so in North America than most places in the world. And that is the loss of the atrophy of muscle over time faster than it should be. And that would, lend itself to a high correlation to mitochondrial load or concentration, to your point, Justin. But why exercise reduces chronic disease in the first place is one of my areas of focus, not expertise, and I know yours as well. It's one of the key benefits of exercise, obviously, is its ability to boost mitochondrial biogenesis. So aging's not a disease, but rapid aging and loss of mitochondrial function is, and then all the things that come with it. So the creation of new mitochondria, that's why I was mentioning that trifecta in the beginning. So we could always reverse engineer this in any situation, but this is what it's about when it comes to exercise. This is a crucial factor for maintaining energy production and reducing chronic disease risk. Just exercising. Muscles are the organ of longevity. And then, as we age, mitochondrial biogenesis declines, leading to decreased ATP production, which is energy. Of course, more ATP means fewer, oxidative stress or ROS species, better metabolism, improved exercise performance. You're not going to break something. You're not going to fall, break a hip, end in the hospital or your femur. And of course, increased muscle mass. That's what it's doing. And then, the longevity factors, the opposite of aging and disease, increasing muscle mass is an independent predictor of longevity. And the host within muscle to be able to do so, again, is mitochondrial function and the output. So more muscle mass means better metabolic function. And by the way, better cognitive function. And there's that direct, we study gene at the DNA. This is really not so known. BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Obviously, we're very proud of that and a whole slew of others that correlate. But now they're looking at this as a two-way signaler. You increase BDNF by exercising, but there's also a myokine correlation to this. BDNF is upregulated directly in the muscle tissue. Anyways, so then mitochondria and disease, as mitochondria shrink or they decline and atrophy with age, just to come full circle to this aging phenomenon and mitochondrial dysfunction. Diseases like heart disease and cancer, so closely tied to mitochondrial dysfunction. The heart has one of the highest densities of mitochondria. We just said that. It's particularly vulnerable to aging and mitochondrial decline. Cancer, the big C's, cancer cells, these cells shift away from mitochondrial energy production to survive. They're producing energy outside of mitochondria, which helps them proliferate essentially indefinitely. So there is another sort of paradox. But I thought I'd just sort of wrap that bow around aging and exercise.
No, I like that. And I think in particular, if I could take a point to jump off of, right, I think especially around cardiovascular disease, right? Because that's not as closely associated, I think, with mitochondrial decline, at least within the public eye. And part of that is not just the energy production, right? Your heart's always working. And so, yes, of course, there's going to be a high concentration there because you consistently need that. But also you have to think about other things that the mitochondria does for us. For example, calcium regulation. It supports a lot of what are the extracellular calcium concentrations, which we know is so exceptionally important to muscle function, to electrolytes, to the balances of the body. So not only when you start to lose that, the power and the integrity of what the mitochondria does, are you losing energy? You're also losing some very delicate and important balances within the body. And so I think the conversation of energy is really, really important, but I would also extend it to offer, especially for tying it back to the heart, why do these things eventually dysregulate? Part of it is because the body is very, evolution is naturally, how do we get the biggest bang for our buck? So as we brought this external organelle in, right? We said, okay, cool. If you're going to join our family, if you're going to join our team, you got to do something. Not only do you have to give us energy, you also have to help us with other needs. And so I think this is this beautiful thing to kind of, again, tie it back to what Bryce and Justin are both saying is, think of the reverse engineering that Bryce has very beautifully stated, but also be very humble to your power to support yourself here, right? We have placed supplements at the bottom of this, and that's not to say supplements aren't helpful. There are contexts, especially in illness, where supplements are game-changing. That said, if you're looking to this delicate balance, if you're looking to the energy production, sleep, exercise, fasting, and fasting is an interesting one, that all of those are foundational to what you can do. And I could offer anyone in most states of health can do at least one of the three things, right? Maybe not all. Everyone's kind of approaching us in a different space of their health. But amongst fasting, amongst exercise, and amongst proper sleep, people can
Well,
be.
you know, and you alluded to, and we've been talking and alluding slightly, you know, so the cognitive decline, which, you know, obviously we're seeing epidemic in North America around more
Mm.
than anywhere else in the world. It used to be the old, you know, recommendation was to, if you're developing cognitive decline, particularly and challenges with Parkinson's for that matter, it
Mhm.
used to be sit on the couch, you know, and
Yeah,
avoid sort of risk from tremors.
absolutely.
It's flipped. Now what they're saying is you got to actually exercise. Exercise has been directly shown to decrease or at least quell the tremors. So, you know, when it's heart disease, obviously the heart requires the energy. The mitochondrial output of ATP, obviously, when that weakens, the output of the heart, you know, fails. That's cardiovascular disease in one aspect of it. But mitochondrial dysfunction promotes a huge amount of oxidative stress. I wrote my whole first book on this, the Analytics of Prescription. Not a lot of it's changed. The science is still pretty clear that when you damage the blood vessels and accelerate the plaque formation, that is what leads to heart disease. It's not so much or as much cholesterol, which, by the way, when we start talking about ingredients, we will. We can talk about things like niacinamide or even niacin for that matter, a simple B vitamin that's so integral into what we also test for at the DNA company as it pertains to methylation, indirectly, but nonetheless important. Vitamin B2, obviously B12 and folate are there, but the B complex family and its importance to fuel the mitochondria. Beyond some of these things, you know, we hear a lot of sort of new faddish ingredients, and we'll get there. But Justin, you know, what are some of the things that you're seeing? Because you're one of our clinicians, you do a lot of programs with the DNA company. What are you hearing and seeing from individuals who are, as you correlate to chronic diseases that you decide and or investigate further are mitochondrially related?
You know, it's so interesting, Bryce, because the body almost has this butterfly effect. You know, like you remember that movie where it's like a butterfly flaps its wings on one side of the world and it
Yeah.
causes a hurricane on the other side of the world. I don't subscribe to the science of that, but I do think in the body something similar happens. So let me try using an example. You just mentioned oxidative stress, right? And we've been talking about things like sleep. So here's an interesting nuance. What a lot of people don't know is that melatonin is actually one of the body's primary antioxidants. Most of your melatonin is made in the gut, almost all of it, right? In the PM, you know, the brain produces a little bit more, but within the actual GI tract, the majority of that melatonin is made. When we have something like poor sleep and melatonin dysregulation, it can actually stop doing its job of helping the SOD2 pathway to clear free radicals. And then it leads to this oxidative stress. So I get patients that have, let's say, gut dysbiosis, and it compromises their sleep. And then the sleep compromises their mitochondria. And it's this cascade that takes place. So one of the funner things about my job is finding these little puzzle pieces and seeing what the actual underlying metabolic problem is. And it's really far reaching. Maybe they don't exercise, maybe they just have total sleep dysregulation, suboptimal clock gene, etc. But I always look at that DNA 360 and I find those weak points first. And that's a way for me to identify healing opportunities within the genes, right? So people, like we've mentioned, will jump directly to a urolithin A or something, which is a great ingredient. But what if it's stemming from gut dysbiosis? Right?
Right.
What if it's stemming from suboptimal, BDNF, like you mentioned? Maybe there's some other weak point. So I always zoom out and I start there. I find the weak points and work backwards. Then we add in various interventions. You know, you should be sweating, you should be exercising, you probably should be fasting, unless you're underweight or something. There's a couple circumstances where not. But that's kind of the approach. I find the weak points and then work backwards. There's always something. And it's so funny how the body has all this connective tissue. And when one system gets compromised, everything does thereafter. You know, so that's the term holistic. There's fundamental homeostatic mechanisms going on here. kicking people out of homeostasis. And that's what I'm after. I'm trying to find that.
That's very cool.
Yeah. Dr. K, do you have anything else? I mean, you've done this so much longer than me, but is there anything I left out of that?
No, I think that's a brilliant, brilliant description. And I think it also echoes back your comment of the butterfly and the chaos effect. I think when we think of mitochondrial disorder, I think one of the struggles or dysfunction, I should be more specific, one of the struggles of detailing it to people and even to an extent convincing them that this is something that should be at the table is that it presents in so many different ways, right? One person that is struggling with mitochondrial disorder is going to present in a different way. And it's in part due to that personalization of the person, right? We know that from blueprint genes, right? People are going to be more susceptible in certain systems of their body, and that will be where that weak point first shows up, right? Because if you lose that energy, if you lose that capacity within a certain system, right? That's where you're going to present, even though to an extent you're kind of always coming back to lacking of the fundamentals in life and how that then impacts organelles, which then bubbles up to these larger issues. I love that. I love your approach. And I see this very beautifully in the people that you work with, this very collaborative, but curious, investigative approach, right? You bring that really beautiful, you kind of take that step back and say, cool, let's sit with curiosity and let's poke around and let's see at a very foundational level what we can shift with.
Yeah. And so if you're out there and you or a loved one or family member is struggling with what seems to be so far what we've described as mitochondrial dysfunction, definitely get in touch with the company, the DNAcompany.com, and find Justin. He's an incredible clinician on board with us that, does the deep dive and from all facets of lifestyle, diet, nutrition, and exercise. And guys, and actually, Justin, I heard you a second ago talk about connective tissue. And I know you didn't mean literal connective tissue, although here's what's interesting. You meant how every organ connects to each other, some of which is through connective tissue, such as the gult, the viscera, et cetera. But there is some interesting when it comes to ground substance, not specifically fascia, but articular cartilage. And a lot of theories being thrown around right now that arthritis and the whole inflammasome around predisposing individuals to arthritis and degeneration of joints, let's just call it what's in between your bones, is actually the lack of mitochondrial autophagy. That is to say, one of those three pivotal things that can lead to disease, that if they're working well is avoiding disease. If your joints, and most of us, this is what's happening, aren't turning over the inherent mitochondria within those chondrocytes, that in fact you are experiencing a high degree of cytokine proliferation and not turning over the mitochondria as efficiently. But I thought, guys, I think we should probably talk about the role of genetics, what we do so well in mitochondrial function and dysfunction, right? Obviously, discuss how not mutations that lead to diseases, but dysfunctions and or suboptimal variations, because there's no right or wrong genes. We talk about this all the time. There's just what gene sets you have, and then what you're able to maybe do about those genes, pathways, and how they work together. So obviously at the DNA Company, we're looking at this whole complex orchestration of what at the end of the day is going to either enhance mitochondrial biogenesis, improve mitochondrial efficiency, maybe even activate mitophagy, but very much, obviously, improve its biogenesis or turnover by protecting it in the first place, right? So we're going to talk about, let's open that can of worms. Superoxide dismutase, the whole glutathionization family, detox family, glutathione peroxidase. I got to hand it over to you in a second, Dr. Kosterman, for the methylation cycle. That's your mastery, and you have so much insight there, including, by the way, sort of a surrogate to B12, the fucotransferates, that's all involved. Even UCP1, right? Thermogenesis. By the way, brown fat. Can I just say this before I hand this baton off to you? Brown fat, brown adipose tissue, or BAT, is so rich in mitochondria. Justin, one of the reasons, of course, we know we do the cold plunges that we do. The high concentration of mitochondrial brown fat is what gives its brown color as opposed to white. But by the way, I don't know, a lot of people know that. But unlike white fat, which is what's primarily storing energy so that we can use and break it down. Brown fats, more about the mitochondria that adds to our metabolic load and ability. So they're very specialized for energy expenditure and heat production. So that's what we're looking at the DNA company when we're looking at UCP1, which plays this key role in the non-shivering thermogenesis. You're not shivering, your muscles are not moving, but the brown fat under the cold exposure is what ultimately is activating the mitochondria and then increasing your basal metabolic rate. That's how that's working. But let's open up first methylation, maybe, Dr. Kosterman, and then maybe Justin, you can get into some of the detox pathways and how we protect our mitochondria better.
Yeah. So methylation is a very complex system within the body that the end goal is really, I would say, tagging things, right? It's almost a communication system within the body of like, hey, I'm done with this. I'm going to tag it for removal. So it's really, really helpful within the brain in the sense that it will tag certain neurotransmitters and be like, you're done. It's very helpful within the hormones, sex steroid hormones, and that it will tag various estrogens and be like, you're done. And it will also tag a lot of what we'll generally call toxins or a lot of these oxidative stressors. It will toss the tag on them and the body then knows must remove. This is really it's a happily complex biochemical series. And we at the DNA company look at 7 different genes here, right? And so many of these are, or at least I'll say one is popularized within the science media. It's called the, excuse my French, the motherfucker gene, the MTHFR.
She did it. She dropped the bomb.
It had to happen at one point. She did it.
B is going to give you a big beep right across that in the go to life.
I got to earn my keep. For anyone who's listened to our CEO talk, I got to earn my keep. I got to keep up somehow. But coming back to it, a lot of people have gotten their motherfucker, their MTHFR gene run, right? And a lot of people will make decisions off of that. And when people come to us, we strongly counsel against that, against the idea of looking at one gene and against the idea of acting exclusively on it. Because what I've just said is, I'm not going to dig too deep into the biochemistry of this. We're focusing on mitochondria, but I just said that methylation is this really complex biochemical process. And think about any team sport, right? When you're watching a team sport, if you're watching one player, you know what that player is doing. You know if they have the ball, if they're shooting, if they're doing sport stuff that I don't understand, but you don't really know what's going on in the game because you can't see all the players and how they're engaging. So unfortunately, a lot of the time what will happen is when people just look at that one gene, they understand one player and they don't know the players that are helping or the players that are receiving. So what we look at is that full pathway, and we really dig down into the fine tuning of how do we support this pathway? How do we support one of the strongest and most important ways of detoxification, that tagging within the body? And that will get us to the point of, to Bryce's point, right? We talked a lot about B vitamins feed the mitochondria. B vitamins feed your methylation process. And very specifically, we want to dig deep into what forms are best. Not all B vitamins are created equal. So for example, folate, B9, right? We just talked about that motherfucker gene. If you have a certain combination of SHMT1, which is a gene, an enzyme that very directly plays with your MTHFR gene, right? If you give it a form that enzyme, that gene, that player is not happy with, it actually messes up the game. They don't play well together. You have to be very exacting. And so a lot of the time what will happen is people will read, oh, I have a bad MTHFR. I need to take a lot of methylfolate because that is only what MTHFR does. And they'll end up making themselves sick. They'll end up zapping them of energy. They'll end up stopping a lot of that tagging process and therefore creating issue within the body. So to happily come back to the mitochondria, which I think I got a little bit lost, but that's okay. I love biochemistry. We'll stay with it. Methylation is one of the stronger ways we can support kind of that oxidative balance within the body and the burden within the body, right? We talk about things that are requiring of energy, are requiring of balance, and can disrupt cellular function and really pull in that immune activity of the mitochondria. And so without methylation, you're putting yourself at greater risk for that. So balancing your methylation is one of the most protective things that you can do for your mitochondria, even though intuitively it's not directly involved. It's not one of those genes that we call on when we say, hey, let's talk about mitochondria, but it is so profoundly important. So thank you, Bryce,
Absolutely.
for
You know,
yeah.
and so I'm going to try to summarize for everybody here. It's going to correct me if I'm wrong before handing back over to Justin for glutathionization pathway, which is so protective for the mitochondria, of course. So they rely on that system. So Justin, you're up in a second, but here's what I heard you say. Basically, methylation supports mitochondria function, and it does so by basically regulating energy production. There's that antioxidant defense system there, detox, DNA repair, right? And we're looking at the DNA company at the motherfucker gene, MTHFR. I just had this whole recap was just to be able to say that, by the way.
You're welcome.
MTR, MTRR, SHMT1. There is an indirect validation to look at the fucal transferase FUT2, but essentially that all of which, if they're not functioning, if there's impaired methylation, often due to those genetic variants, that leads to reduced ATP production, higher oxidative stress, and damage to mitochondria. So again, if mitochondrial dysfunction, which can directly worsen methylation efficiency, that's one of the trifecta, right? Creates this vicious cycle, essentially, that butterfly effect Justin talked about, that contributes to aging, chronic fatigue, neurodegeneration, cardiovascular disease, and all kinds of other mitochondrial related conditions. Did I get it right?
Yeah, no, I think that's perfect. That's beautiful. It's very direct in that you're bathing. If you're not cleaning stuff up, you're bathing your mitochondria in junk. And separate to that, if you're not cleaning stuff up, you're creating problems,
Right.
which then requires more energy and effort and expenditure from the mitochondria.
Yep. Justin, how are we protecting the mitochondria at the DNA company? Or at least what are we looking into as it pertains to what is damaging them? You can look at it sort of either way.
This speaks so well to that butterfly effect, because almost everything that we look at has some kind of a role in how the cells operate and the efficiency of the cells, right? Like the methylation cycle is part of how we detox. It's part of how we deal with inflammation, as is things like the glutathionization pathway, right? So like glutathione is an important part of phase 2 detox. So our body takes toxins, it changes them around and renders them water soluble so that you can get rid of them. This is why we landed on the systems of genes that we ultimately picked. And when I say we, I mean my predecessors being you guys and Dr. Mansour Mohammed and Haris Khan, the founders of this company. There's so many genes you guys could have picked, but you went through and found the ones that are most clinically relevant for how the general pop's cells are going to work, how they're going to detox, how they're going to deal with inflammation. Right. So we deal with 3 different glutathione genes. Those aren't the only ones, but they speak to different locations in the body that are really relevant for general health. Right. So we've got a liver detox gene, GSTT1. We've got a gut detox gene, GSTM1. Respiratory tract, GSTP1. Each one representing how the cells glutathionize themselves. So when we're talking about toxins and we're talking about inflammation, there's a bunch of different moving parts, right? The SOD2 pathway, the methylation cycle, your vitamin C transport with a gene called SLC23A1, even your vitamin D pathway, for which we test 3 different things. You can't tell me that doesn't play a role in detox, anti-inflammatory action, and therefore how the mitochondria work. So if you haven't had your DNA 360 done, this is why you've got to do it, because you're going to learn so many things. And when we put it all together with a coaching program, we know where to steer the boat. You know, we're not guessing anymore. We're not throwing spaghetti at a wall. Look at your glutathionization, look at your vitamin D, look at your methylation, and then look at your SOD2. That's probably the most direct pathway that we have to like how the body deals with these free radicals. That's what it is. It's a HEPA filter that exists in the mitochondria to clear those free radicals.
I love that. I love that. I love that analogy. And I was just about to give you an A+, but I feel like you forgot about one.
Which one?
GPX.
All right, glutathione peroxidase matters. for the SOD2 pathway as well. It kind of works together with that one. So
Says
yes, we
the
test
man
for
who focuses on balance. GPX is your balance
homeostasis.
there.
Right.
Thank
So
you.
the relevance to methylation is the homocysteine to glutathinization pathway, and the bridge there between, the methylation pathway to the glutathinization pathway. The synthesis of glutathione to protect these mitochondria, so relevant to our ability to generate energy so that our detox pathways work, really, and so many other extensions. So there's a whole slew of genes we look at. And if there was just any other impetus for people to get tested, maybe it's to slow down the aging process. And we have an incredible deal that's going on right now. There's a bundle, and that is through the de-aging testing. And I forgot my number, so somebody on the team is actually going to post that in the webinar chat. But it is a wonderful. There it is. You're going to get $115 off the regular price of the longevity bundle. So that includes the DNA 360 we're talking about. But here's the impetus to maybe think about it more: is the de-aging test there. So DNA aging. There's no coupon required. You just click the link in the webinar chat, and and that's a baseline. So this is something really important to understand here. DNA is only one and done. Then you have your instruction manual as to how well your mitochondria are working and a million other things. But the aging, you're going to get a baseline of your chronological age, right? So you know that already. And then you're going to get a baseline of your biological age, was what I was referring to. How fast are you aging, which is directly related to mitochondrial function. The fun thing, and this is a challenge for everybody out there, the fun thing is do some of what we're going to talk about next over the next 3 months. Come back to us after retesting the DNA aging test and tell us how well you did. Justin and myself, Dr. Koshman, we say this all the time. We are changing the day you die. So let that sink in for a second. Changing the day you die by these interventions that are informed by the DNA test 360 and the DNA aging. So these lifestyle, supplemental, which we'll talk about now, technological interventions over the course of 3 to 6 months, followed up by another DNA aging test as a methylation test, is changing the day you're putting years on your life. Quality, health span, years, bottom line. We know that. So why don't we start talking about the solutions? Why don't we start talking about some of the things that we know that's supported by the literature? I mean, we can start at the top just because or what I mean by top is, if you guys want, we can start in any direction you want. But, our poll suggested everyone is supplementing. Even though we rank that a little lower, we can start there, or we talked a little bit about exercise, technologies. Where do you guys want to go?
I like the idea personally, at least, of jumping into supplements, because I think, we've done a lot of webinars on exercise and sleep. And I think maybe the powers that be can post those in the chat. Why don't we, especially since everyone's on supplements and clearly interested in that, after our statement, supplements are last, why don't we dig into supplements first? Because I think then we might need to jump into some of the Q's and A's.
But they are the easiest thing to do. I'll take a quick lead here, because I mean, I've traveled the globe, and I pride myself in having not trusted. I don't know about you, Dr. K, but or Justin, I've not trusted from day one the nutraceutical representatives that showed up on my clinic doorstep. And the reason why I didn't trust them is not because I'm not a trusting person. It's because what I would be often suggested to do was join them for a free lunch while they talk to me about an N of 9 trial. And so I started declining these white paper silly, but that's the problem in the nutraceutical world, at least as it was 25 years ago. Now things are getting better. And there's more money invested into these new technologies and delivery systems and interesting, mitochondrial support ingredients. But I've traveled the world, and I've done my due diligence in dozens of manufacturers of raw materials. So I do, not just from a clinical perspective, I do have an expertise in the raw material ingredients side. And I can tell you, and I've spoken to them. I've spoken to Dr. Charles Brenner. I've spoken to Dr. David Sinclair. I've spoken to Dr. Joe Brunner and Michael Crabtree. I've spoken to all these guys that are on the bleeding edge of what is it that is fueling the mitochondria. There's a couple of things we can do here. We can add ingredients to the body that are going to do, and again, the trifecta comes up here. It's going to enhance mitochondrial function. That's the energy ATP. we can protect them from oxidative stress and decline, or we can enhance autophagy. Very few things we can do on that side. That's more lifestyle and tech, but there's at least the urolithin A. In fact, I'll give Justin that story to tell. I'm just saying that if you talk to Dr. Charles Brenner, he's going to tell you about nicotinamide riboside. If you talk to Dr. David Sinclair, the Harvard Anti-Aging Clinic, he's going to talk to you about nicotinamide mononucleotide, or NMN. If you talk to the folks that are really more of the niacinamide and D-ribose school of thought, here's what I'm getting at. All of them work. Some of them more expensive than others. They all work. What are they doing? They're enhancing downstream production of NAD, nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, to enhance the very bottom line currency of energy in the cell, which is ATP. So they're just outputting more, giving you that high octane fuel to your mitochondria to make more of exactly what you're looking for. So that's one way to do this. The other is protecting. And at the DNA company, Dr. Kosterman, and myself included, formulated a wonderful, I think, protocol for this, and to
I
protect
support and
mitochondria.
enable that, Bragg. I think it's important. It is a wonderful formulation.
Mitochondrial support. And what did we do? We added ingredients that are going to protect, multiply, and even increase downstream production. All three of these things, full circle to this sort of trifecta, to help any chronicities that are related to mitochondrial dysfunction. So, and a couple other ingredients, and then I'll hand it off. PQQ, pyrroloquinone quinone, or pyrroloquinone quinine. That's always a mouthful.
I'm impressed you even endeavored that one.
PQQ and ubiquinol, these two work together in synergy to, again, produce more of the protection and mitochondrial division. Mitochondria can divide. Not only do you have to clear out the old ones, that's the autophagy, but they can divide and multiply. So, and then the autophagy, urolithin A, pomegranate juice extract. Just, I know you love that stuff. What is that doing?
So urolithin A is actually what's called a postbiotic. And so that basically means that it gets created after the fact. And I think that that's why it's been a pretty difficult one for companies to formulate. But urolithin A is exactly what you mentioned. It's an extract of pomegranates, but only about 30% of people have the particular gut makeup to turn it into a postbiotic. If you just have pomegranates, you could have a friggin' bucket full of them. And if you don't actually have the gut bacteria that can turn it into a postbiotic, you're not going to get the mitophagy benefits out of it. So urolithin A is something that you can actually supplement with now in its active form already. And it's got pretty much a direct benefit on the mitochondria, that mitophagy process. So that's what's cool. And that's why we talk about supplements. We put them at the bottom of our totem pole list here, but that's why they're valuable, is because I could eat pomegranates all day and perhaps not get urolithin A. A supplement affords me the opportunity to do such a thing.
Bingo.
Right. So that's why they isolate the nutrient so that you can take whatever quantity of it. So some people are like, oh, supplements, you just eat healthy and it's all good. I am that guy. I do say eat healthy first, right? But this is the value of them. Sometimes you need a little more. Sometimes we have a genetic weak point, or just we don't have the ability to get a particular nutrient easily. If it's not easy, 90% of us aren't going to do it because we live in 2024 and we have work and we have stuff to do. So that's where supplementing is powerful. I don't want to disrespect supplements, by saying that they're not the highest thing on the priority list, but that's why they're valuable, because you can
it's when you get everything else right. It's when you get all the other things right, and you can't, as we like to say at the DNA company, you can't really eat yourself into therapeutic range of a lot of these micronutrients and, or by the way, botanicals, or let's just even call them nutraceutics, that are not even found in your diet. And to your point around urolithin A, even if it's found in pomegranates, you're not able to, it's not bioavailable. You're not able to bring it into your system and then utilize it. So you just have to go to a supplement form. Another very concrete evidence-based example is cruciferous vegetable family extract. So, kale, cabbage, mustard greens, broccoli, you name it. What we identify in this downstream detox pathway, especially within the hormone pathway, is that some people just need additional support through dimethyl, indole 3-carbinol, sulforaphane, whatever these things are, to convert their 4 and 16 hydroxy estrogens into the more favorable 2 hydroxy estrogens. So long story short, you'd have to eat what, 30, 40 big bowls of broccoli a day to get the
Prepared a
therapeutic
certain
intervention.
way.
And you could,
Yeah.
right, you could never, right?
Yeah. 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 Nor would
Correct. And maybe you have an oxalate issue and you don't want to eat a bucket full of kale, but perhaps you have a genetic pathway that suggests you make tons of 4-hydroxy or 16 alpha hydroxy estrogen. Well, that's the value of the supplement, because I'm going to get a dose of the ingredient I want, but the macro, my gut can't tolerate, right? So maybe I can handle the micro, but not the macro. That's where supplementing is useful.
And I think the takeaway, if I'm hearing you too, and I strongly agree with this, is the idea supplements are not bad. In many instances, supplements are required and or needed, especially when you're not feeling well. I think what we're trying to bring home here is a lot of people, based on social media advertisement, based on the, well, so-and-so said this, will just kind of adopt supplements into their diet without a concerted plan, without a concerted, this is what I'm trying to achieve, and I have a good picture of my health. And so I think, Justin, you can probably tell me you've done this a million times. Bryce, I know you've done this more than a million times. Of people come to you with literally, I mean this so very literally, because this has happened to me, shopping bags of everything that
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
taking. And they're like, I'm sick and I'm taking all of this, and you have to tell me what else I need to take, as if these shopping bags. And so our commentary around supplements is not that they're not helpful to the mitochondria along these 3 streams of giving it supplies, of protecting it and helping it clear out old mess, right? The idea is you want to be very, very specific and strategic, right? We see a lot of people who make themselves, for example, with my favorite motherfucker gene, right? People make themselves sick supplementing with the wrong thing. And everyone thinks that B vitamins are benign, that, oh, whatever, I could take it, it doesn't matter. And we know that's not true. So it's not that supplements are bad. It's just the strategy behind them and the selection behind them that needs to be supported and curated. And so I'd very quickly and toss like Justin out. I know we can make this a bit of a fan show, right? You want to come to someone who's going to listen to what you're talking about and then offer strategy behind the supplements. I think that's my takeaway.
Well, that's amazing takeaway. And seeing as, you know, we are talking strategy, might as well start answering some questions, because Conley and Lorena are both asking an incredibly important question. And I'm just gonna we're gonna get to them both at the same time. So Conley's asking, I'm curious about the free changes I can make first. And often, by the way, the most powerful ones are in fact free. You got to eat anyway, and or exercise. What are the best fasting techniques, and also what is good sleep hygiene? And then Lorena's asking, how long do you need to fast to affect mitochondrial health? She does time restricted eating. That's the intermittent fasting, but can't fast long because of prescription meds that she has to be taking with food. That's a challenge. So I'm going to dive deep quickly, but deep into the intermittent fasting. Justin, we can do this separately or together if you want, but then over to you, Dr. Klosterman, as it relates to sleep hygiene. So here goes. I think that free is most powerful. I've already said that. I think intermittent fasting, whether it's 16-8 method or a 5-2, which is 5 days on, 2 days off, even calorie intake reduced to, the literature supports 500 to 600 calories. I'm not saying Lorena can do that. I'm saying the eat, stop, eat, which often involves also maybe fasting for 24 hours, once or twice a week. Alternate day fasting, water fasting sometimes once a week, or even the 12-12 method. This is a great place for people to start. So you fast for 12 hours and you have a 12-hour window. The science shows, especially as it relates to autophagy and mitophagy, that is the purposeful clearing of dead or dying cells, is that you really need to reach that 14, likely 16 if you don't have, you know, blood sugar issues, hour window of fasting before you're going to see that. So that is to say, to create an 8 or a 6 hour even window of eating or feeding, you're going to see the best results. But similar to intermittent fasting, time restricted eating, and again, that's kind of that, you know, like that 8 hour, you know, that's the easiest for people to do that I see. And I think to answer the question around like how long, to go back to that trifecta, I think that biogenesis, fasting activates, we know this, this is maybe a little bit technical, but the AMPK, which stimulates the production of new healthier mitochondria. That triggers after I alluded to about 12 to 16 hours. That's when it starts. So that's the number one on the trifecta. Number two is the autophagy. That fasting essentially promotes the clearing out. And then again, that happens between 12 and 16 hours, go figure. And then the reduction of oxidative stress, where the mitochondria are ultimately more susceptible to damage, even with 12 to 14 hour fasts. Again, same window I'm talking about here, shows that reactive oxygen species are reduced. So I don't know. I hope I got it all in there. So it's really within a short period of time, within the 24 hours. Bottom line, if you can achieve the 14 to 16 hour fasting and the 6 to 8 hour eating windows, right? I mean, Justin, right?
I completely agree. Earlier in the call, I mentioned that FHC, the fundamental homeostatic mechanism.
Right.
And I think that the relationship between AMPK and mTOR is one of those things that we want to try to balance out here. I personally only do a 12 and 12 for the most part, and then I hit a 24 now and again, but it's because I work out too much. Like, honestly, I have a minimum where I think a lot of people don't have so much of a minimum when it comes to protein requirements, amino acid requirements. But the other thing that I would mention as well is just those gut microbiome benefits of taking a break, right, from the input and the food, and just letting the microbiome, the gut one, I'm saying, clear out. I do think that, like I mentioned, your melatonin's made in your gut. There's so many butterfly effects within the body that a simple strategy of eating within that 16 and 8 can really amplify a ton of these mechanisms at once, and it's absolutely free. Who wants to get out of bed and run right to the frying pan anyways? It's irritating. It's better to just get coffee and get a move on, in my opinion.
Speaking about getting out of bed, sleep hygiene, Dr. Kosterman, this is so important. It's the regenerative, like your body needs the break. It's not all about exercise and fasting and supplementation. Where do we got to go? Because, Lorraine is asking.
Yeah, no, I'd love to. And just a quick call out to women, especially women who are menstruating. Sometimes that will shift how you're going to want to approach fasting. There's a few protocols out there. I would offer there's a huge element of personalization, in particular, where you are in your cycle. And so really working with a practitioner and listening to your body as you go about that, because men, while there is variation in hormone, et cetera, we experience that a lot more. And of consequence to that, you have to be a little bit more mindful and careful, in particular, if you're shooting for things like fertility or consistency of hormones. So just a call out to the people within the audience that are menstruating, there's a little bit of nuance to how we go about fasting, but still very possible. Right. I'm a woman who menstruates and I fast. I do my 24 once a week. So it's possible. There's just nuance, and then there's gentleness as well, based on where we are. Let's jump into sleep though. I think, it's interesting that we talk about exercise and these kind of episodic stresses as something that's really good to building and supporting mitochondria, right? Fasting is a stress on the body. Exercise, stress on the body. And apologies, I have a cat who wants to be famous with us. So it's interesting that those are kind of bursts and things that you do while you need to do them consistently. It is the deviation from the normal that is helpful. Now, when it comes to sleep, it is almost the opposite. There's an element of ritual and consistency that is exceptionally important. So when I think through sleep hygiene, consistency is one of the most important things here. So what I would offer, you need to move. What I would offer is there's a beautiful symphony of hormones and neurotransmitters and other things, even the life within the gut. They sync themselves up to approximately a 24-hour cycle, right? And this is really, will allow our waking time to be that mark. But the moment you wake up, you start that cascade, that symphony that will bring you to the point where you're going to start getting tired in the evening and want to go to bed. So for sleep hygiene, first and foremost, highly, highly, highly recommend identify a time which you're going to commit to waking up at, and identify a time that you're going to commit to not going to bed, commit to start winding down, right? The world that we live in, there's very few people that live in kind of that more rested parasympathetic state. Most of us live with computers, most of us live with stresses, most of us live with cats that want to interrupt things, right? We're not naturally in that parasympathetic state. So commit to a time that you want to start winding down. Consider that your bedtime, and allow some time, some restful time without screens. I know that's difficult, to start bringing yourself down to that point so that there is another, an hour or two later, you're actually getting into bed. This consistency is first and foremost. I think after this, we need to examine the space you're sleeping in. Is it cold? Is it dark? Right? We evolved in ways that we require these things, in particular the cool, right? We talk about mitochondria wanting to keep it clean, wanting to keep this brain clean. The most important time for that is during the evening, and the most important time for that requires being cold to an extent, right? So that it can perform those functions properly. So when we think to sleep hygiene, first and foremost, get your schedule, right? And really adhere to it. I would also offer for the insomniacs out there who are like, oh, I couldn't fall asleep last night. It's important to really adhere to that wake up time, because that wake up time sets your bedtime. If you sleep in, it's going to mess up when your body's naturally ready to go to bed. So sticking to that consistency, and then examining the environment, right? Reducing light, ensuring it's cool, either by air conditioning, by sleep pad. There's different ways that you can approach that, right? Not sleeping with a million blankets, even though the weighted blankets of the world, especially for our nervous system, might be happy. And I think also too, for those that think to the consistency, looking at genes like clock can be very, very helpful, because that will give you a gauge. Are you someone that can naturally set those cycles, that consistency, or are you someone that, like myself, has to work harder at it because you're a night owl and would prefer to stay up all night instead of being productive and sleeping? Did I miss anything, Justin, Bryce?
Well, we have a lot of genes that help to understand the individual and how much they need to focus on their sleep hygiene, from genes that describe the circadian rhythm to certain hormones and hunger cues. So there's so much out there. But no, I think that's very complete. Justin, there's a question from Diane. We've got a lot of questions, so we're going to try to whip through them best we can. Diane's asking, she's got 22 SNPs. In her methylation pathway. Well, first of all, Diane, we all have multiple SNPs. It's the variation you have which may be problematic. Not to correct you in that, I'm just making sure everyone understands these are variations, and which variations you have will be dependent on how we act on them. But she's asking how to work around this. She knows glutathione is what she's basically saying, Justin, is there are variations in her methylation pathway for which she needs some help. She knows glutathione is probably one of them. Where does she start?
Yeah, so there's definitely a relationship between elevated homocysteine levels and perhaps an inefficiency going on within the actual methylation cycle. Homocysteine and methionine balance is one of the things that is an actual objective of the methylation cycle, right? So some of the genes that we look at, they play a role in the recycling of that methionine and the homocysteine. When homocysteine is elevated, it can certainly cause some cellular havoc. It can cause some inflammation in the body. We kind of whittle it down from there, and that's why we look at the 7 genes that Dr. Krista mentioned. We have a methylation cascade, and then there's also things like COMT in there as well, which is actually in your mood and behavior profile. What I would say is that your glutathione profile speaks to your ability to deal with the toxins, and it works in tandem with the methylation cycle, because they both kind of serve that role. So we look at the efficiency of the cycle, but let's say you have a great methylation cycle, but you have total deletions and things in your glutathione profile. One doesn't necessarily make up for the other.
Yeah.
Right. So we have to kind of know all of the above to know where we're going to place those interventions. We need to know what kind of B vitamins you need to be on with specificity, because we can't just be throwing methyl groups into your body willy-nilly like some people think. So we zoom out, right? That's Justin's favorite term. Zoom out and look at all these various profiles. We selected those 5. Once again, when I say we, I mean people before me, much smarter than me, in order to really look at the efficiency of the methylation cycle. And then we pair it with the glutathione profile as well. I'm not sure if that answers the question. Do you guys
No,
have
I think that
anything
was
to add?
perfect. And, speaking of glutathione, Marissa's asking, speaking about detox, what are some, why do some people not do well with glutathione supplementation? And I got to
Mm.
tell you, I think there are so many reasons. This is such a can of worms. Um,
Do you want to speak maybe to the
I
reasons
get,
specific to mitochondria?
yeah, well, it speaks directly to mitochondria because at the end of the day, if, you don't have the reserve interest, oh my gosh, to where to start here. There's such a difference between intracellular, extracellular glutathione concentrations, what it's doing to protect the mitochondria itself, what it's doing to actually subserve some of the dysfunctional, glutathionization pathway genes. There's so many genetic predispositions, there's digestive issues, there's detox challenges that relate to the environment. So I think here's some of the reasons. I'm not going to get to all of them. There's just no way. But the main ones we appreciate at the DNA company relate to the GST family, GSTM1, GSTP1, GSTT1. And of course, we look at those, by the way, in copy number variations, the T1 and M1. So, and of course, methylation, that relates as well. People with methylation problems like the MTHFR, I think we've sworn enough tonight, so I'll just say it like that, may struggle with this recycling, obviously in production, which leads to, bad results with glutathinization supplementation because their bodies can't really as efficiently use it. That'll be the number one. Then there's inadequate pathways. So there's the Herxheimer's reaction, as we all know, the healing response. So some people experience, headaches, fatigue, digestive issues. That's not necessarily a bad thing. And you want to be under the guidance of a clinician to work you through that. So, as it pushes the body to basically detoxify more rapidly. There's heavy metal paradox. If those are loaded in your system, you're starting to work them out. There's also bad delivery systems. There's so many different, reduced glutathione and all these different variants of there's probably 32 well done PubMed studies, only 3 of which show some good promise on some select glutathione direct. I'm talking about not the precursors, direct supplemental glutathione even becoming intracellular. So getting beyond. So the thing about glutathione is we all make it. It's in our cells. Some of us need help and need more of it. The challenge is getting it intracellularly to where it's needed to protect the mitochondria and do its job for detoxification beyond homeostasis. This is the thing people don't understand. You don't just take glutathione, most of which will just burn up in your stomach. You have to supplement with the right types, which we use at the DNA company, and the precursors, which are the following: N-acetylcysteine, most important, alpha lipoic acid, which we like the R plus isomer, and selenium in small amounts, which you can probably get from like 3 Brazil nuts a day. And I think that impaired gut function, Justin was talking about a little earlier. I think some people have sulfur sensitivity. I think that there's a dosing and timing issue. I'm going to leave it there. There was so many more questions that we got to answer, but I think there's a lot of reasons for that one. Most of which are genetic related. So Steph's asking for some people trying to lower cortisol. This plays a role, right? So the higher the cortisol, the higher the stress, the lower the mitochondrial function, the more mitochondrial dysfunction there is, but then it's harder to exercise, but exercise is the best thing for your stress. There's this paradox here. So somebody try to lower cortisol to facilitate fat burn and mitochondrial health. What would you suggest? I've heard of ashwagandha. Okay, another supplement, but can we talk here quickly about maybe the intervention is technology? Maybe it is things like, cold immersion, and Justin, maybe why, and maybe it's, PEMF and some other thing, because the supplements that we talked about, they're really helpful, but there are other things that aren't necessarily prohibitively expensive that can reduce cortisol, shunt it, and at the same time grow brown fat, et cetera. I mean, can you describe that?
Yeah.
Technoceuticals? Did you just
So
say technoceuticals?
No, Techceuticals.
Yeah,
cool.
I've never heard that name. I like it.
Me neither.
Yeah, no, it's an emerging category, I guess, but I love that we're kind of ushering it in the same way that we're talking about supplements, because not everything needs to be something you take, especially for people with compromised GI. Those with compromised GI, I saw someone in the comments was gluten sensitive, and there's a million different reasons we don't get the right food or the bacteria. These are ways that you don't have to rely on your gut or an IV, which a lot of people aren't really open to doing. Yeah. So Justin, please, because you're such a subject matter expert in the space, even though I taught you new words. Makes me happy.
Yeah. No, that was awesome, Dr. K. I'm going to remember that. And with cortisol, there's quite a few things to say, right? Because it's not like there's high cortisol, but it's really the rhythm of it that we want to pay attention to. Typically, when you test your cortisol, you're going to take like 4 different measurements throughout the day. It's going to be AM, an afternoon, an evening, and a nighttime measurement. And there should be an identifiable rhythm going on there. If it's chronically elevated, then we're going to need to point to or figure out why that is, because is there caffeine use going on over and over again, or do you have a ADRA2B deletion but you work for a hospital or something to where you're just constantly kicking on the fight or flight mechanisms? When it's elevated, I just want you to know as well, there's a point where it becomes actually lower after that. That is a bigger problem, because it means that the HPA axis is becoming completely. So that's a bit of a rabbit hole, but usually when it's elevated, at least the system is still working, because you're able to actually still continue to pump out cortisol, which is good. It ought to be high in the AM, like 6 a.m., give or take 6 or 7. It should dip. And at night, it should really reach its lowest point about 12 hours after you wake up. It's a catabolic hormone. We want that to drop in the PM, and then your anabolic hormones should be raising at the same time. Your growth hormone, your melatonin, your testosterone. If it's elevated and it's affecting you from a weight loss perspective, I think ashwagandha is a great thing to use. But I would say that your breath is a really more free thing to go towards, something to trigger parasympathetic activity in the body that's really reliable and free and easy and quick. With regard to technopoly, as I like to call it, I taught you a word now, Dr. K.
Technopoly.
That's from Trailer Park Boys. If you're not Canadian, you probably won't know what that is. But
you're just not cool.
yeah, PEMF, like Bryce mentioned, is a great tool. It really restores the body from an inflammatory perspective, and it's also really calming to the body, and it's a great place to shut it down midday. I use one from Higher Dose, which I've shouted out a number of times on these webinars, because it's really effective for keeping those midday cortisol levels low, because that's when I do it, is kind of in the middle of the day. Rhodiola is another good ingredient if we're talking about supplementation. I think that you should identify why it's elevated, though, and I would suggest you look at what time of day it's elevated, because if you take your measurement only in the morning, it might be appropriate. Who knows?
Yeah.
Right?
You mentioned such a good point there, is really getting baseline. So the DNA company, we do such a great job with the 360 test. We offer the DNA aging, so your chronological versus biological age, the which includes sort of an indirect mitochondrial baseline as well. So, and then the microbiome, so we're looking at all these different things that give good insights into what your body is doing in the first place. And then, of course, we have clinicians who can interpret things, like oats, organic acid tests. There's I got to shout out Genova Diagnostics is one of my favorite labs, and they have this wonderful, very complete, over 125 different biomarkers, including the whole citric acid cycle downstream into NAD production, nutrient deficiencies, oxidative stress, mitochondria. But the biggest but, you got to know your DNA first, because this is just a lifetime snapshot. Very important one. But oats, all these functional tests are wonderful. Great Plains, I love them for their oat tests. We can interpret them. A bunch of our clinicians can interpret those. Mitoswab, that's another one that I like. But the point is, first know your DNA, because the most important intervention is learned through what your genetic aptitude is. Secondly, where you're snapshotting right now in the moment. I think that's really important for folks to know. Then Dirk's asking, in methylation, is there an immune system? Is it the immune system that eliminates these tag substances? I'm not sure what he means by tag. Do you have a stab in the dark?
I think that was me when I said methylation tags things.
Oh, gotcha. So maybe you can explain to him that, is it immune or is it
methylation?
Well,
I think when we talk about eliminating a lot of the toxins, right, we can kind of think to the liver, right? We can think to liver, we can think to kidney. So with liver, there's 3 phases to detox. There's phase 1, which is the tagging, phase 2, which is the the phase 1 and 2 are kind of the prep. Methylation specifically is part of phase 2. And then phase 3 is more the literal elimination, be that through bowel movements, through sweat, or through urination. right? And so all of those organs are involved. And so without getting too deep into it, methylation is part of phase 2 when it in the liver. And that's part of that tagging system and that elimination system. And then ultimately things will come out through colon for bowel movement, kidneys and bladder for urine, and then all of your glorious skin when you're sweating.
Perfect. I'll take Nina's question.
Ooh.
Oh, sir, did I miss somebody? Yeah, I think Nina's next.
No,
Nina's
no, no.
asking, can you
Yes.
talk about which nutrients, et cetera, that diminish as we age? Melatonin is her first one, which is true. Out of the pineal gland, that melatonin, and even as Justin alluded to earlier, the gut dysfunction, which can happen as we age for dietary reasons and a whole bunch of other things, starts to decline. No question. ATP production through what we're talking about, methylation dysfunction, is a huge one. We just naturally decline on the amount and concentration of mitochondria in all our cells. But there's a laundry list, and many of which are related back to mitochondrial dysfunction. So ubiquinol or coenzyme Q10 is the non-reduced format's known, but we like the reduced form, the ubiquinol. Glutathione is another one. Hormones like DHEA, testosterone in men, mostly in estrogen in women. We study the hormonal pathway. Vitamin D, not just is it critical for bone health and immune health and reducing inflammation, there is an age-related decline. The skin's ability to synthesize vitamin D from sunlight decreases with age, and we look at that at the DNA company. It starts at day one, day zero. It starts in utero. Genes are starting to behave as your mom and dad have dealt you those cards. And then, of course, there's magnesium. I mean, over 300 enzymatic functions in the body, muscle function, nerve signaling, bone health, and directly methylation function. There's an age-related decline there as well. There's an absorption factor, decreases with age. Kidneys become less efficient at not only, processing, conserving different types of magnesium, et cetera. Collagen, descent, decline, deflation, the 3 Ds of aging, collagen. The body has this natural function and it slows down. Thinner skin, joint stiffness, that chondral dysfunction, meaning between bone, ground substance, let's just refer to as in general, but the stuff that is between bones, the leading science around the inflammasome is suggesting that mitochondrial dysfunction is occurring and there's not enough sweeping out of the old stuff and bringing in the new stuff. So there's that. And then also hyaluronic acid related to that same thing. Leads to drier, less elastic skin. The list is so long: NAD, vitamin B, blah, 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 omega-3s. It is so many things that we have to consider. So it's a long list. Human growth hormone. Justin's going to kick me under the table if I don't mention that one. So there you go. And then libs.
Oh, go ahead.
You have more?
No. Well, I would say like digestive enzymatic.
Oh yeah,
we always
yeah.
talk
But a lot
about
of these things are the micronutrients that help the body make those enzymes, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Oh,
even
absolutely.
the mitochondria that contribute to the energy production so that these, cells are actually producing. The list, it's such a long list. And the thing is, well, actually, here's the good news though, right? I guess what we're trying to say is by supporting mitochondria and all the things that we have insights to at the DNA company, you're going to be aging slower, more healthily, right? You're going to be increasing your health span and therefore putting good, healthy years on. I'm going to say it again. I love this, this slogan that we've adopted. You can change the day you die. We're writing the book on it currently. Libs is asking, do you run into competing genetics? The quote, help, end quote, for one causes a problem for another. Oh, that's a really good one. Dr. K, go.
Well, so yes is the answer. And I think this is why it's incredibly important. And I'm glad someone said they like my cat because she's running a mess right now. I think this is really important to Justin's point, why we zoom out, right? It's to the analogy of methylation. When you look at one gene, but you don't consider the whole system, that's where the imbalances can happen, right? I've seen a lot of people. So here's a really good example of one, right? So Bryce has mentioned DIM, something that a lot of females, women, especially menstruating women, will use to support estrogen regulation within the body and especially positive production thereof, right? And that will slow a few other systems down. It actually can shift methylation to an extent, which will have brain impact, right? And so I've spoken with some women who are like, whew, okay, my period's doing much better. I'm feeling much better to a lot of the hormone profile, but my mind has shifted. Right. And a lot of that comes back to the way methylation was impacted. right? And so it's always taking that step back, appreciating, to Justin's eloquent point, that everything's connected. There's an element of a butterfly, and it's really important to do a lot of these undertakings, appreciating your genes, figuring out which ones you're going to or meaningfully approach, meaningfully intervene with someone else.
Yeah.
You want a third party perspective there. And I say this, I tell this to all the doctors. This isn't a comment of you don't know enough. You know, between the internet, people can learn enough. It's a perspective comment. It's having someone take a step back, appreciate your genes in a third party way, appreciate what's going on in your life, and be like, cool, let's collaborate. Let's create a strategy together. So have I seen this happen a lot? Yes. Right? Especially we think about people who have poor methylation profiles and have poor estrogen profiles, right? Most pointedly within there, I think, is the most salient examples that come to mind. But I think this is where you come into working with someone who understands, especially those pathways.
Yeah.
And then how do we, in a very gentle, loving, kind of collaborative way with the body, support them so that you're not kind of supporting one and then messing up another.
For sure. I'm going to take Jackie's question. Then we've got two more before we wrap, guys. So Jackie's saying that she has Parkinson's, and the literature is very solid now that this is a mitochondrial dysfunction issue. If not, a disease, it's a dysfunction of mitochondria. And a lot of other reasons that contribute to this, there's no question. But she says, I took a DNA test and found that she's missing a copy of GSTT1, so copy number variation, more meaningful than just a SNP or single nucleotide polymorphism, and both copies of GSTM1. So we see that combination of what we call dual null variants even. So no copies of either play a huge role in chronic disease, fibromyalgia, MCIS, Lyme, all those ones we were asking about in the beginning. But here's the good news. So Jackie is asking, can she ever expect a detox protocol to work? And we're not talking about cute little over-the-counter at your local health food store cleanse for, 2 weeks for $3.99 on special. We're talking about supporting detoxification pathways. So Jackie, while you have a compromised detox capacity due to the missing GSTT1 copy number variation, GSTM1, you can absolutely still benefit from a detox protocol specific to you, more personalized approach by boosting and doing the precursory boost to glutathione production, supporting even alternative detox pathways. There's a bunch of others. We mentioned sort of the correlation to methylation and, supporting other pathways. It's not just protecting liver cells. It's that too. Oxidative stress. It's that too. But you can enhance your body's own ability to detoxify, even though you've got those copy numbers. It's just that much more important. And so given the Parkinson's diagnosis, this is where it's key to work with a healthcare professional. We have them at the DNA company that are experienced in the genetic detoxification pathways. So highly recommend that you work on optimizing the detox protocol, working through a professional. I couldn't be more. And by the way, everything we've said so far and everything we'll continue to say in the last few minutes here is you have to see a clinician. You have to, ask your doctor. You cannot just take our webinar advice and run with it. What we're saying is for informational purposes only this evening, but we have clinicians that go well beyond that. So Janice is asking, this is maybe one for you, Dr. K, both you guys. I'm going to throw it up in the air and whoever catches it. Ready? Your sleep optimizer includes ashwagandha, which I have had a negative reaction to in the past.
Yeah.
Okay, we've heard of that. And I've heard positive and negative things about melatonin. Maybe Dr. Kosterman, maybe this is an opportunity, and they'll give Justin the last one, to talk about Black Label, custom formulas. Can we talk about it?
Yeah. We'll talk about Black Label and then I'll offer my opinion on melatonin. So in collaboration with Dr. Bryce, and I really bow because it was a lot of your innovation here that led to this, we are launching something called Black Label. And so Black Label is a very customized approach to supplements. So instead of taking a bottle off the shelf that's already pre-formulated, right? You can't really adjust what's in the cap there. This is something that you work with your DNA, you might even work with a practitioner to get it even more fine-tuned, and it's compounded, custom compounded just for you, right? So if the issue is sleep, instead of being forced to pick a bottle off the shelf where you have no ability to adjust what's in it, right? So for example, with ashwagandha, you don't want that in there. you're able to take it out, as well as maybe add something in that's more appropriate and more supportive either to your genes or to history, right? So for example, that this is helpful. So Black Label is an opportunity. We should be launching October, I believe. And it's that opportunity to have just like the custom approaches to healthcare in the sense of sitting with someone, knowing your blueprint, knowing everything that's going on, getting that third party, that very bespoke customization of care we're offering in the supplement space. As to melatonin, my bias is going to come out. I'll be playing based on literature reviews and kind of the nerd deep dives. Short of jet lag, in instances where you have a legitimate issue with making melatonin is not helpful when it comes to sleep. From a literature perspective outside of jet lag, it's not supportive. There's some instances in cancer and there's a few other very clinically focused, but if you're struggling with sleep, melatonin is not very helpful. And so I would suggest looking at other agents as well as some of the sleep hygiene things that we discussed, or, examining biome. There's so many reasons that your sleep can be disrupted. It's a space that you really want to get curious in, be it with the Justin of the world, to really investigate what is the true cause of this. Is it stress? Is it gut? Is it detox? What is it? And then designing and working from there. Yeah.
Customization is what we're all about. So we can formulate something for you, Janice, that's going to suit you. And boy, for anyone else who hasn't tried our sleep optimizer, there is a treat of an ingredient in there that I just got to shout out to before Justin answers this final question. And that is California poppy. And we're not talking about the red poppy that Dorothy falls asleep in The Wizard of Oz, because that's opium related, but it's a sister, it's a cousin, we'll call it. It's got mu1 and 2 activity exclusively, non-addictive. So what that means in lay terms is it's going to activate mu receptors. So that is somewhat the opiate, but non-addictive opiate receptors. So the calm, relaxing. And it's got 5-HTT agonistic activity, which translates into upregulation of serotonin in the day and natural melatonin production from your pineal gland should you be actually deficient at night. So like, I love this ingredient, does so much more than that. Justin, couldn't be more perfect to end off on this, because this is right up your alley again. I can't, Conley's asking, I can't confirm that I've got nerve damage in my fingers. It won't matter, you'll see. But I find that a cold plunge or even cold weather can numb her fingertips for up to 8 hours. That's probably, by the way, Ray notes. She should look into that. But is a cold rinse in the shower helpful since I can't do the 3-minute plunge? I know you're going to talk about PEMF here again. You should. But what else can she do there?
Yeah, with regard to the nerves, for sure, PEMF is among those strategies that I would be throwing in there to hopefully rehabilitate whatever the actual issue is there. As far as the cold is concerned, one interesting thing that you can look at is that your forehead, like your face, as well as your chest area here, like upper chest, have a ton of temperature sensors there. So you don't necessarily need to put your hand in there, which my understanding is that that's what would be causing you that issue, is the immersion of the hand in cold water. You can get a ton of cold therapy benefits just by getting the cold water on your face. Like if you have a big old bowl of ice water and just dunk your head in there, or if you stand underneath of the shower and just get it on your face and get it on your chest, you can certainly get a ton of those benefits that way. So that's one thing that I do with, friends who are just like, nope, I am not doing cold exposure. I'm like, okay, we'll just get your head in there and we'll start there. Honestly, as far as the difference in benefit from a cold shower to a cold plunge, I mean, real immersion is, of course, going to be the most impactful, right? It transmits temperature like 25 times more than the air would. I'm also a bigger fan of that than I am of cryo, frankly. Maybe that's just the old school in me. Bryce agrees. I'm sure Dr. K does as well. I know you don't love it, Dr. K, but that's to each their own. Some cold exposure is still going to be very useful for all the things we talked about: brown fat, adipose tissue, and it aids in epinephrine, right? Norepinephrine. There's weight loss benefits. There's mitochondrial benefits, anti-inflammatory benefits. You don't need 3 minutes, really. I mean, 90 seconds will get you a heck of a lot of those benefits as well. And maybe it's just a matter of keeping that hand away. It's an awkward thing to stand there with your hand out, but if that's where the true issue is, then just focus on the rest of your body. But yeah, you can get the benefits from a shower as opposed to a plunge, or worst case, Ontario. just go ahead and immerse your face in a bowl, and you're going to get some of those benefits.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. Who wants a $50,000, a cryotherapy unit when you can,
Jump in
probably
like,
access something for, under $1,000 these days and do it in your backyard, at the comfort of your own home. So
yeah, it's catching on. I saw the other
it
day, like
is,
Costco is selling these cold tubs.
do we have a partner with the DNA company yet? If we don't, we should, but we may. I don't
For
know.
cold plunging or
Maybe
for
B can write
sauna?
it into the notes
Yeah.
here. And I mean, I happen to use Culture. I love those guys. They're a Canadian company, where some of
Yeah.
us here at the DNA company are Canadian, and they do a great product. But I know we have, some partners that are worthy of we've done our due diligence as a group, not just me saying so. So, wow, we had a great combo, guys. As we, I guess, wrap. This was a deep dive into mitochondrial health and its dysfunction. But we want to leave everyone empowered, right? And before, I guess, we sign off and get into sort of this, the special that we have tonight, the uh, premise is the health of your mitochondria isn't just about energy production. It's about how you age. It's about how you feel. It's about how you can fight off disease. And what you've learned this evening with us is, it can be the key to unlocking younger years, but also healthier years. So whether it's time restricted eating, or enhancing your detox pathways, or maybe just being more mindful of the genes that influence your health, that we hope this extends your life, or as we like to call it, change the day you die. So thank you all for your time. Any final thoughts from you guys?
Yeah, I'll offer one. This speaks a lot to the quality of your life. I think that energy is one of those things that you need to love. It's one of those things that you need to perform at work. When you have enough energy, that which you possess is what you release. You can only release that which you possess. So when you have a high quality of energy, you're going to have better output throughout your life with everything that you possibly might want to accomplish. So keep those mitochondria healthy, and we'll see everybody next time. Dr. K, anything to add?
No, I think I like this. I like the idea of adding years to life, but adding quality years. And so as you've listened to us this evening, and we've offered kind of these things that you can do to support yourself, really sit with what feels good and what would you enjoy, right? I'm a huge advocate. There's no sense in kind of extending a life that you're not necessarily jazzed about living. So make sure you're happy and excited about those health interventions that you add, because to our point tonight, there's many roads that can get to the same point. There's many supplements that support the mitochondria. There's many exercises and fasting lifestyle things, many foods. Figure out what you enjoy and incorporate that with some variation. Yeah.
Absolutely. And the shameful plug, here it is as we sign off. Tonight's the night. It's $115 off the individual kit price of the longevity bundle, which itself at full price is worth every cent. Your health's an investment, never an expense, and includes a DNA 360. That's your baseline. That's a one and done, and the DNA aging test. There's no coupon required. All you got to do is go to the link in the webinar chat, which is the dnacompany.com/product/longevity-bundle. And even if it's not for you, give it to somebody that you love and want to see longer, but it should be for your whole family. Thanks, guys. That was really fun. We'll do it next time.
Thank you.
Au revoir.